Welcome, everybody, to another episode of UFO Man Live, featuring my friends and my co-conspirator to my side, Tommy Highway and Thomas. Can you please introduce yourselves?
Hey, folks, I'm Tommy Highway. I'm a network engineer. I'm an author, ufologist. Really happy to be here, guys. Thanks for everybody for coming out. We've got a great show for you as always.
Thomas.
Hey, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. My name is Thomas. I'm a software engineer. A little bit to go along with the network side, Tommy. I'm a ufologist, ancient alien theorist, and practicing CE5 meditation. So looking forward to the show.
Okay, we're going to address an issue tonight that is kind of concerning. Recently on Facebook, I had a group called Ghost Squad. Also along with a group called UFO Man Nation and UFO Man. One of my groups was flagged for some unknown arbitrary reason by Facebook. And a lot of the people affiliated with my channel and myself had their channels disabled. If that happened, that was not the intent of UFO Man. We had a benign group that was family friendly, and an algorithm or some arbitrary person got upset about something unknown and caused everyone's channel to shut down. If that happened to you, we are sincerely sorry that happened, but we had no idea that was going to occur because our channels, channel groups were very benign and family friendly. So there's a lot of censorship going on. Why that's happening, who knows? It could just be the state of affairs in our country at this time. Tommy?
Well, that's right, Tim. And unfortunately, that's the times that we live in right now. We have a very small group of people that are actually deciding what the larger group of people should be thinking. Okay, they're taking it upon themselves to make that decision for the rest of us. And you can see this even in journalism and other things that in our society. Instead of giving us the full picture like they're supposed to do and let the people decide for themselves, unfortunately, they've taken it upon themselves to dictate what people are supposed to think and how they're supposed to feel. And with this this purge thing with Facebook, I mean, my own mother lost her channel. And I guarantee my mother's never done anything on Facebook to violate the terms of service. Now, the particular group that we believe caused us the issue, which was the Ghost Squad group, I was an admin on that group. I personally saw every single post that came through there, and I saw nothing that would violate anyone's terms of service anywhere at any point in time on the internet. That's absolutely ridiculous. We believe that there are other reasons for this purge. We believe they're political. So
right, we can't verify the fact that they're political, but it seems like they're using the fact of Ghost Squad as a way to cover up their tracks. But freedom of speech and freedom of choice on Facebook no longer exists. If you don't actually agree with the narrative that's being pushed, your channel is no longer active. That's the way it seems. But Thomas, what do you have to say about that?
I think it's a shame. I mean, we're seeing a lot of good content, a lot of good people who are being taken down off of Facebook for no real reason other than censorship. And it's turned into, like Tommy had said before, they're trying to make you think how they want you to think about something. They want to prejudge something. And they're only taking a very small narrative of what they're going and affecting and going on. And it's a purge. And it's sad.
Right.
You know, I've seen a bunch of content, a bunch of creators taken down off of YouTube, taken on off every single place that they go to and try to go to, because it's such an active, you know, call it a propaganda kind of, because they only want a certain version of the news, and it's their version going around. And if anyone says anything different, they're doing everything they can to stop it. And it's, you know, we're losing the free press.
Right.
some would call it Marxism.
Yeah.
I can honestly say that I had a couple friends that were affiliated with my channel, one that was an admin that also did not have a group. And they were informed that they were shut down to violations of community standards. But you tell me this, how can you violate community standards if you don't have a group to do that?
Well, also, if we can't sit around and tell each other ghost stories at this point in this country, what's the point?
Right. And right. That's been done for eons around campfires.
Right.
So it's kind of like, what's the point? Yeah. Okay. So now going into our subject for this evening in regards to UFOs, we're going to be talking about the February 10th, 1955 Holloman Air Force Base meeting between Dwight D. Eisenhower and an alien group on the end of the tarmac for about 40 to 45 minutes. I have
a great story, Tim.
Yeah, I have a couple clips. One from a man by the name of Manuel Kirkland, who also brings on another gentleman who were there and actually can verify the fact that this did occur. And I also have another gentleman who is a legislator who saw a briefing during his term in office in regards to the actual account of Dwight D. Eisenhower having a meeting with an alien group. I also know for a fact that Edward Snowden made the comment a couple of years ago that said that Dwight D. Eisenhower met up with the tall whites in 1955 to make an agreement for technology in exchange for things that the tall whites wanted, mainly control of our system of government. So if that's the actual case, then the tall whites are involved with our government. Think about that. The ramifications of that could be very widespread. Supposedly the tall whites were the group that helped the Germans come to power during World War II. But because the Germans lost the war in the sense of losing a war, not necessarily losing the war in reality, because when they came to the U.S., they kind of took over the U.S. in a way by putting us in space and becoming NASA. So what I'm getting at is it's very complicated. The whites have been around for a while. They've been affiliated with the Nellis Air Force Base. There have been sightings there of them flying their craft. So let's get down to the video and watch it. This is Manuel Kirkland. He's really well spoken, so let's take a look at his video clip. Here we go.
When I went to Holloman Air Force Base, because George Air Force Base didn't have a high altitude chamber. So I went to Holloman and worked at the Aeromed laboratory under Colonel John Paul Stapp, the guy who drove the rocket sled. There were 4 flight surgeons at Holloman. John Paul Stapp was one. David Simons was another. And there was a hospital commander, a lieutenant colonel, I can't remember his name, and Dr. Robert Reiner, who was a captain. I went to Reiner's office from the Aeromed laboratories because I did not keep chicken eggs alive. I didn't put any water in an incubator and they died. Now, David Simons wrote a kind of bad letter for me so that I'd get out of there. And he did the right thing because I'm not a lab person. I'm a person. Okay? When I went to work for Dr. Reiner, I worked in the flight surgeon's office there. Dr. Reiner was the best man that I have ever worked for in my life. Marvelous man. While I was there, Eisenhower was going to land one day, and in the winter, February, Holloman Air Force Base has got a code that unless in the wintertime, everything is normally khakis. Unless you're doing base operations work and are an officer of an official standing on the base, then you wear blues. That's in the wintertime. So the story that I'm telling you, the difference between khakis and blues is very important. When Eisenhower was supposed to land, or come in, the day before he was to come in, a parade to honor him was canceled. The President of the United States is entitled to full military honors at any base that he lands on. And that means a parade. Dr. Reiner asked me if I wanted to go to the parade, and I said no. He says, okay, you're working. Well, the work schedule of Eisenhower didn't show up, and the parade didn't show up. So I just went to work like normal. And when I went there, there was a nurse who worked there that said, Kirkland, where's Dorsey? Dorsey Moore was the airman in charge of our little group. He wasn't an officer, he was an airman. And I said, I don't. And just then Dorothea Thorenson, who was our clerk typist, said, I saw him take his wife down to the commissary. He'll be back in about 15 or 20 minutes. I just kept quiet after that, you know. When Dorsey came in about 15 minutes later, he said, Kirkland, did you see what's out on the flight line? I said, what is it? He says, it's a disc, hovering disc. I'm thinking disc that you can throw, 12 inches maybe, wooden with a steel rim. The only thing that I knew that hovered other than that was a helicopter and the Navy's hovercraft. And I'm saying, oh, I said, what's it made of? He says, metal, like polished aluminum, polished steel. He said, you know, metal. I said, how big is it? He said, 20 to 30 feet. I said, no, I haven't seen it. He said, you want to see it? I said, yes. I said, I'd like to see it. He said, go out to the front of the hospital, he says, and look down at the flight line. He said, you'll see it. I said, with my luck, I said, I would go out there and it wouldn't be there. He said, I wouldn't say that. He says, I took my wife to the commissary. It was there 30 minutes later when I left. And I said, well, I'll ask. In a base where there's war conditions, regardless of where you're at, you're on 24/7. And if you leave your assigned spot, that's against the law, military law. So I asked the nurse who had asked the doctor if I could go out to the front and see it. She looked at the doctor, and the doctor said no, so I didn't go. 9 o'clock, go for coffee. Coming back from coffee, I'm following two young pilots. The one on the left is in khakis, the one on the right is in blues. The one on the left said, why the blues? He says, I'm the officer of the day. He says, I've been down at base ops all day. He said, waiting for the plane to come in. He said, Air Force One? He said, yes. Air Force One, that was the first time I heard Air Force One. I didn't know what it meant. I had to ask that too. Well, in the 60s, that was very common, but in the 40s, it was the first time I heard it. He said, well, what happened? He said, he landed, he turned around on the active and shut down. And we were told to turn off our radar. Why were you told to turn off your radar? I don't know. He said, we were told to turn it off, so we turned them off. And then the guy in the khaki said, I heard that the one that was brought down at Roswell was brought down with Doppler radar. And he said, I don't know. They continued talking. What happened after that? He said, they came out over the mountains, across the proving ground, White Sands proving ground, across the monument, and the guy on the left, again, the khaki guy said, I heard one landed at the monument. He said, the other one said, I don't know about that. I'm telling you what I saw. He says, two of them came over. One landed on the active in front of the plane, and the other one hovered overhead like it was protecting that plane. He got out of his plane, walked to the UFO, and the door opened, and he walked inside. How long was he in there? About 40 or 45 minutes. Could you see? Were they grays? He says, I couldn't see. I didn't have binoculars. Who had the binoculars? The tower. Could they see? No, they didn't have the angle. This is all going on while I'm walking behind them, probably no more from here to the lobby area. And as they were doing this, one of them said, did you see, the one on the left again, did you see the autopsy film? And the one on the right said, yes. Do you think it's real? I don't know. So it was available in 55. And he said, well, he said, does electronic waves, radio waves go through plastic? He said, why do you ask that? He said, because I think there's a radar unit in the nose of that airplane. And I'm saying, who are you talking about? I said, are you pilots? And they shut up, turned around till I couldn't read their names, and walked on. I went to the flight surgeon's office. At 11 o'clock, I went like I normally did to pick up the mail. Picking up the mail, a new officer, supply officer, said, Kirkland, I've been looking for you. He said, did you see anything down on the flight line? I said, no, but I'm qualified for emergency operation, first aid, all of this, graduated top of my classes. And I said, no. Do you need help? He said, no, I just wondered. At noon, you know, Dorsey didn't show up after lunch. The nurse and Dorothea Thorenson both asked me, where's Dorsey? I said, I don't know. Sometimes if we're not too busy, he goes home and eats. He'll be here in a few minutes. 2:30 shows up, 2:45. Dorsey's not there at 2:30, but about 2:45 he shows up. I'm walking out for coffee, and I say, Dorsey, where have you been? He says, at a meeting. I said, well, you better tell Dorothea and the nurse because they're wondering where you're at. After work, I'm in my barracks room and I'm called outside to the back of the barracks because Air Force One is flying over the residential area at Holloman Air Force Base. That's a no-fly area zone. I ran out, looked for it. I had to jump up because the plane was flying low and it just passed over the roof of our building. Air Force One flew from Holloman at about, 4 o'clock, maybe 4:30. After that, I waited until supper. And from supper, I went out and I looked at the flight surgeon's office and the lights were on. I said, I wonder what's going on because part of my job is to check and make sure the lights go off. So I walked over and there was Captain RENE talking to a lieutenant colonel who was in blues. And he said, the colonel was talking. He said, Bob, he said, I was there on stage with him, standing room only, 225 people in supply hangar. Bob said, Captain RENE said, that he had heard that he had talked at the base theater. He said he might have been because he only spoke for a couple of minutes and then he left and the base commander spoke for about 20. He could have had plenty of time to go over the base theater and come back. He said, but I'm telling you is what I saw. Standing room only in the supply hangar, 225 people each time it was there. And I said, who talked? He said, the commander-in-chief. I said, the president. He said, the commander-in-chief. You don't ask a lieutenant colonel again if it was the president. So I knew that. I said, what did he talk about? He says, it's classified. I said, how is it classified? Confidential? He says, higher. I said, secret. He said, higher. I said, oh. He says, what's the O? I said, I'm only classified as secret. It's none of my business. And he says, I would not say that if I were you. Okay. About 3 months after that, I was getting ready to go overseas, and I asked a bunch of guys that were there, and because I said, I have never heard a president talk. Have any of you ever heard a president talk? They said, yes. One of them said, yes. I said, who? He said, Eisenhower. I said, where? He said, the base theater. And another airman said, hey. And the conversation stopped just like that. That was in 1955. I didn't believe in these things for 40 years. 1995, I was listening to a man by the name of Mike Murphy in Kansas City. And Mike Murphy was interviewing a guy by the name of Bob Dean. But Mike kept calling him Bob O'Day. Don't ask me why, I'm just saying that he did. Bob Dean said that he had talked to a man who was a crew member aboard Air Force One that landed at Holloman. And Holloman got at Holloman, Eisenhower got out and went aboard a UFO. I said, my God, I was there. I became a believer. You know, I started putting together this information and tried to get it to various people. I got some of the information to Mike Murphy and was interviewed on radio 3 times. I sent a letter of some of this material to Stan Freeman, and I got back a mimeograph thing that said he wanted to buy, do you want to buy my books? You know, I'm not really interested in his books, you know. The reason I'm not interested in his books is because I know Eisenhower met with UFOs. Okay, so Linda Moulton Howe was on Mike Murphy's radio show, and I called in and offered her the same information, and no, she was doing her thing. She never called back. She never wanted any of this information. So I went to the Ozarks later on, meeting there, and saw Linda Moulton Howe, and I said, I just wanted to see what you look like, and that was all. She was doing her own thing and still does her own thing, not related to my incidents at all, and she wasn't interested. So nobody was really interested at all. But when I was graduated from Long Beach, I worked at North American, and I worked at Burbank and Lockheed. I worked on the Blackbird. And then from there, I went to Motorola and worked as a scientific computer specialist for an analog group, Ed Groth by name. This is kind of interesting too. Ed said that the electronic people had told him that they had made a 120 to 150 year jump. I said, how? And he said, by backward engineering a foreign object. I said, Russian? He said he didn't know where it came from, but it was backward engineered. About a week later, an electrical engineer told me that the guys who were doing the backward engineering had said that what they were backward engineering was a computer. And this computer carried 30 digits of accuracy. Where do you need 30 digits of accuracy? Only terrestrial. Only interstellar. You don't need it on this earth. From there, I went back to Collins Radio. And from Collins Radio, I went to Houston working for Lockheed's Missile and Space. I worked on the trainers. And while I was there at the trainers, it was very interesting because another incident took place. Wally Schrar worked in the same office that I did, only he had a view of the outside. I worked in an inside cubicle. It wasn't very nice, okay, by comparison. The astronauts, and this is hearsay because I was not there, but I was told by somebody that did. The astronauts were told that they should not talk about any kitchen items flying, like pancakes, dishes, or cups. Saucers were not mentioned. Do you understand what I mean? He said. You're not to talk about this among yourselves, your wives, your family, or anyone by radio or on the radio. Oh, yeah. Okay. Wally Schrar is up in space, circling the Earth, and he says, Houston, there is a Santa Claus. The boys went around the moon, came back out from the far side, and another astronaut said, there is a Santa Claus, and he's big. Now, how big he was, I never figured out until I heard at Laughlin this year that 2 Navy men had seen a craft come out of the water about a mile and a half away from them that was 3 to 5 times the size of an aircraft carrier. That's big. It carries about 10,000 people. The question is whether it's ours or theirs. Okay? Now, the verification of my story at Holloman was done by Art Campbell, and Art has recorded information of a woman whose father became a fireman. So, you want, Art?
We will put on the electrician's daughter, please. This lady contacted me as a result of an article in the UFO magazine. And
I got some, I brought out some memorabilia stuff.
Speaking now.
To show you. Oh, here's Billy. Yeah, that's my
She's going to her personal memorabilia prior to reading a letter from father.
Dad was in the single corps at Camp Gordon, and he loved to climb his poles. There he is with his friend Jim, and that he was practicing going up and down. And there he is again working at cleaning the weapons and getting message pickup. And oh, here's some of his Nebraska fan memorabilia that he loved so much. And he had this with him he had a few plane crashes, and he always had this picture with him. He was very fond of his religion. And this is a current events school newspaper that we used to get every week. This was from in the week of February to March 2nd of 1956, and it was showing these Air Force balloons that were going up. It was every other day in Holloman. We used to just run around and we didn't know that there was anything exciting to know about it. We just thought it was very normal. Oh, and here's some pictures. My dad loved also to do photography, and here is. This is Dad it was with Nixon and Agnew in 1972, and this is in Omaha. Nixon was here in Omaha in 1970, and he got invited to the inaugural ball, and he didn't have his flash, and he was so upset. But there is his own picture, and he was quite involved with the party. He used to fly the Republicans locally. When he moved here in the late 60s, he flew the party members to meetings over southeast Nebraska. And then when Nixon came, he flew the Republican National Committee members in 1970 when they were stumping for Nixon. And he suggested that they talk about the Nebraska football because they played in the Orange Bowl in 69 for the national championship. And so Nixon started his speech in Omaha with Dad's idea about bringing up football. And he also played in Tarkio because he was a stocky person. He loved his football. But anyway, there's some other things here. So I've got some letters right here. I'm sure I'll find that one. Yeah, here's the one that Mom and Dad wrote. Okay, that's Auburn, Nebraska, October 26, 1989. Dear kids, it's beautiful fall here with the usual pumpkins up and down the main drag. Kids are getting excited. Your father and I are doing well. Heard from Helen. She said the grandchild came on time, and although Sharon was in labor, we don't need to talk about that. Anyway, Dad has just come from the kitchen with a cup of coffee, and he says he doesn't mind telling the fireman story again, but you kids know it better after all these years. But he'll recall what he can. All right, this is the part. Well, you kids and Mom moved down from Albuquerque. I think it was in the summer of 1954. As you recall, I had taken the Holloman job that previous winter, and Mom wanted us all together, so we rented a place over near Dudley Elementary School on Maryland, wasn't it? Remember, you kids could walk to school. You were in the 4th grade, and Billy was in 1st or 2nd. Anyhow, sometime after Christmas of 55, we were told President Eisenhower was coming. So George, our boss then at the electric shop, went to a meeting to find out more. He would not be inspecting anything, and they said just carry on as usual. If you see the president, don't gawk, wave, or anything, just carry on. So the day the president came, we went out in the truck to a job where we were replacing some wire down the flight line. It was really old stuff, but that put there in World War II and unsafe. So we heard the president's plane in the morning, lining up for an approach, and watched it land on the far runway. So we waited for it to taxi over to the flight line so we could see him. But we didn't hear it anymore, and it had shut down somewhere out there. So we went ahead and pulled wire for a while, and one of the men, I believe it was Charlie, said he can see out there from that pole over there. So why don't one of us go up the pole and see where the plane is? Well, I had my climbers on, and I started to unbuckle them and was waiting to give them to the first volunteer, when someone said I should do it, as people were used to seeing me up on the poles anyway. So I started up with my back to the sun, a safety measure, which also put my back to the runway where we thought his Connie was. Connie was a nickname for the big constellation the president flew. As I started up, some of the guys reminded me not to gawk, and I heard them laugh. A few minutes later, I heard some shouting, and some guys tarring a hangar roof nearby started to run, pointing out to the runways. Then I heard our truck start up, and some of the crew jumped in with one or two running after it. And they were pointing out to the flight line. And so I decided to turn around on the pole to see what the ruckus was about. And I could not believe what I saw. There was this pie tin-like thing coming at me about 150 feet away. I thought it was remote controlled or something. 25 to 30 feet across. And I started down the pole as fast as I could go. I was up about 40 feet, and I threw my climbing rope out, gave it slack, and only touched the spike on each side of the pole 3 or 4 times on each side in before I got to the bottom. While I was running towards the big hangar, I looked back, and it had stopped and was just sitting there. Well, when we all got back to the shop and we had a good laugh, one of the guys who saw me come down said he got down that pole faster than a fireman. So as you kids were growing up and we had the family gatherings, you used to ask to tell me about the time I became a fireman. You know, I always wondered why we did not use that thing during Vietnam and so forth. And over the years, I realized if we had technology like that, it would have saved lots of lives. But I gradually realized that it had something to do with Ike being there that day. And it wasn't ours. There was an unwritten rule at Holloman. You didn't talk about what you saw. And after that day, it was seldom mentioned at the shop. I still have those climbers here someplace. Billy used to play with them. Remember? Mom here again. Well, Dad's wandered outside someplace. He said something about checking the pump. It's been sluggish lately. Dad thinks the motor's old and needs rewinding. He spends several hours a week up at Harold's helping out with mechanical and electrical stuff for farm equipment. Dr. Fornash says it's okay for Dad to drive a little around town, but to keep an eye on him. He thinks Dad has had a mini stroke or two, but should not do any highway driving at night. He drags his left foot a little, but gets out to the golf course in good weather. But he has to use a cart now. We're looking forward to seeing all you at Christmas. Say hi to Bob and Warren for us and hug the twins. All of our love, Mom and Dad.
Art and I got together over 3 years ago. Art's going to tell you how he got in contact with me. And there's another little vignette from somebody else that was at Holloman. Here's Art.
First, I want to tell you about the lady from Nehemiah County, I believe, southern Nebraska. She's sad. This is the second time she wrote the letter. She read the letter. First time she broke down in the middle of it. Her father died in 2 months after the letter was written. It was the last letter. And she said, I got to make myself over and be back down in a couple of minutes. She came down wearing a wig. She had beautiful salt and pepper hair, but anyhow, we went ahead and filmed it again. Bill didn't mention the fact that, I think he mentioned it, when Eisenhower's plane landed, it's a huge plane. You couldn't, it sits 10 feet off of the tarmac. You have to have a ladder to get in and out of it. And the plane usually was down at the end of the runway and taxis back around to the A part of the, there's an A section of the runway where the tower is. And then it comes to the VIP area where they were going to have the parade, which, by the way, was canceled, Bill mentioned. Well, Eisenhower's plane sat out on the runway as far as it could be. They closed the runway the whole day while the president was there. And Bill said he remembers seeing it about 4:45 or 5 in the afternoon, seeing the president's plane fly over Holloman Air Force Base. So we're ready now for a man who flew into Holloman Air Force Base the day before Eisenhower arrived. We believe it was the 10th, around the 10th of February, 1955, was due to go out in the next morning, and they would not let him go, and they held up his plane for a whole day. He was a staff sergeant who was a loader on a cargo plane. This man saw Ike's plane land and heard President Eisenhower speak at Holloman, February 10th, 1955. Okay, ready for the airman, please, Sergeant Wyckoff. We've had to use pseudonyms for our people. There we go.
In 1950, well, this was actually 1951. I was in an airplane accident, and I had another airplane accident where I split my head open, and it ruined my back. My wife had just lost her first child.
He was a
the
tail gunner in World War II.
Command
43
said,
missions over Japan.
You know, you're due to go to Korea, but in your condition, if you volunteer for Bacalar Air Force Base out in Indiana, any other, that's where you go. So we were fortunate. We went there and stayed there. And my wife was pregnant with our the second child. And I says, they can't send me overseas. Let's just stay in the next year and then we'll get out. So that's what we did. While I was out in Indiana, my job was loading and delivering cargo. We went to Washington, where they opened a new base with cargo, and just kind of anything they wanted, we would fly it.
What other bases did you go to?
Well, I went to March and Holman 2 or 3 times. We hauled what we think is stuff for the atomic bomb.
Dave, what do you recall about Holloman?
Well, we had a haul a load of stuff down there, parts that they needed, and the runway is like this. And I never seen anything like that before. And anyway, as we were there, we saw Air Force One come in. And we didn't know who it was. And then an officer come around and says, you can't leave. And I says, well, the pilot said, we have to leave. And he says, well, President Eisenhower's here, and you can't leave the field until he's gone. And I says, you can hear him over loudspeakers, but it didn't do any good, you know. I would have liked to have seen him. And this officer, that we didn't have the clearance to go into the mess hall. And one of the other officers, a higher ranking officer, came to us and says, would you like to go in and eat and listen to a speech? And most of us said, yeah, because I'd like to see him. I didn't get to shake his hand or anything, but because I didn't have the right badge clearance to go in, but they did leave us go in at the very end, and we ate and listened to a speech.
What do you think of him?
I thought he was great. He had a lot of good ideas. Maybe he had some I disagreed with, but I don't agree with everybody anyway, you know.
Well, Dave, do you remember what date that was that you were there?
The reason I know it, when he was there is here's when I got discharged. He was there in mid-February of 1955. That was my last trip that I made while I was in the service. Then I was discharged and I came back home to the Bay Area with my family.
Does this event with Eisenhower fit into any timeline you may have constructed in terms of what came after this? If this was his first?
There's some things that came afterwards that we're aware of that may or may not be connected. It's our understanding, at least mine, that the extraterrestrials are very interested in our nuclear progress, and they first started showing up a year or so after we dropped the nuclear bomb. The first one set one off in Alamogordo, and I have a feeling that they may have been behind the early peace talks. Eisenhower went to one in July in Geneva called Geneva 1 in July of 1955. And Red China was there, Russia was there. And by the way, the Russians were changing governments, and you know, they were pretty shaky at that time. And Stalin's appointee at the time was Malenkov, had been replaced because he didn't make the 5-year plan, which is one of many. And they were getting ready to replace him with Brezhnev, by the way, who was kind of a crony of Khrushchev. So we were having a Russian government change. At the same time, they were having the Red Chinese shelling Taiwan, and the president goes hunting. Incredible, incredible. But as far as we know, that's the only aftermath of what may have happened. And I, of course, had his first heart attack in September in Denver that year.
Those people took an oath not to reveal that the president was there and what they had seen.
Okay, thank you.
This is why when Bill was in a conversation in Dr. Reiner's office, he said the president and the lieutenant colonel corrected him, commander-in-chief. They weren't allowed to use the word president. And Bill said, you mean the president? He said, no, the commander-in-chief is the president, or whatever he said. But in any case, they didn't want to use that word, although they had to acknowledge he was there. Everybody knew it. Everybody at the base knew he was coming, including all the civilians. There's 8,000 or 9,000 people there, about 4,500 enlisted people and officers, and a complete air wing is there also. They all knew he was coming, but with their communications in those days, there was no way that they communicate that back to Thomasville, Georgia, and they really didn't care. So all he had to do was make sure he came in and out of Thomasville in secret, because he had 30 international press, by the way, were cooling their heels at the Scott Hotel, cleaning out the bar and everything else they could. And Press Secretary Haggard came in and gave them daily briefings about the world situation in the Far East and the evacuation of the Tonkin Islands and the Quemoy-Matsu situation and so forth. And they thought Eisenhower was at a cottage playing Scrabble and having hot toddies with Mamie.
Excuse me, sir.
I now know that all of you believe in Santa Claus too.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to speak to y'all. Speaking the truth, I've been studying this for like 2 years now, and it's been documented that Harry Truman had did a treaty with the Grays, suspectedly, and brought the Rockefellers in. You can check this out through William Cooper, Thomas Costello, and Phil Schneider. And when Truman left office, he had passed it down to Eisenhower. Now, the day that y'all was talking about in February 1955, Eisenhower was scheduled to be in a certain place, but it's documented that he had a toothache on the exact date, and it was supposedly said that he had went to Holloman Air Force Base. That he told the people, the news media, that he had a toothache, but he went to Holloman Air Force Base to have this meeting with the Gray.
You're mistaken in two areas. One, toothache took place in 1954 at Edwards Air Force Base. He never went to the doctor. That's been substantiated by several people.
Right.
And this Holloman instance took place in 1955.
Okay. And the question was about the treaty that was supposed to have been.
I don't know anything about a treaty, but our military was so afraid of what took place in 1938. In 1938, War of the Worlds was broadcast as a radio show, as a news bulletin. And there's only 2 times in my life when I was younger that my father interfered with us listening to the radio. One was in 1938 when that was on, War of the Worlds. And the other one was December 7th in 1941 when Japan attacked us. Now, from those points, the military was very concerned that the public would go ballistic. They did go ballistic. So did the military. The military has never been able to stop these UFOs. And if you can't protect the country, what you're doing, because that's your job, how often will you tell the people the truth? The Germans and the Japanese both lied to their people when they could not stop the Allies from bombing them. We are no different than they are.
That is such a great ending to that video, just the way he said it, and
Right.
where we're at today, and that's the truth. They're all afraid about panic and everything else to keep the truth, but, well.
Right. I do have another clip that backs up these claims. It's former legislator Henry McElroy Jr., and he's going to talk about a briefing he saw while in office concerning the Eisenhower landing. So let's take a look at that. This is only about a 7-minute clip. So sit back and enjoy.
Grab your popcorn, definitely, for this one.
Grab your popcorn. Yeah, there you go. Here we go. Before this plays, I want to say the audio is kind of choppy, so you need to really pay attention to what he's saying.
My name is Henry McElroy Jr., a retiring former state representative from New Hampshire. Thank you for your attention to this brief message concerning the world's interaction with both Earth-based and off-world astronauts. The reason I am making this announcement is in the hopes of encouraging better perspective to all who explore the universe. Therefore, as a result, making a more valuable contribution to humanity for the benefit of all faiths, all races, and all nations. Another reason I am here today is because I believe in the foundational wisdom of our nation, which was laid down by our founding fathers, and because we know that highly advanced knowledge and information can assist human beings in solving various problems, both in current times and in our future. When I was in the New Hampshire State Legislature, I served on the State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Committee. It was apparently important that as a representative of the sovereign people who had elected me to this honorable office, that I be updated on a large number of topics related to the affairs of our people and our nation. As I understood it, some of those ongoing topics had been examined and categorized as federal, state, local development, and security matters. These documents related to various topics, some of which spanned decades of our nation's history. One of those recurring topics is the reason I am addressing you this evening. I would like to submit to our nation my personal testimony of one document related to one of these ongoing topics, which I saw while in office serving on the State Federal Relations and Veterans Affairs Committee. The document I saw was an official brief to President Eisenhower. To the best of my memory, this brief was pervaded with a sense of hope, and it informed President Eisenhower of the continued presence of extraterrestrial beings here in the United States of America. The brief seemed to indicate that a meeting between the president and some of these visitors could be arranged as appropriate if desired. The tone of the brief indicated to me that there was no need for concern, since these visitors were in no way causing any harm or had any intention whatsoever of causing any disruption then or in the future. While I can't verify the times or places or that any meeting or meetings occurred directly between Eisenhower and these visitors, because of his optimism in his farewell address in 1961, I personally believe that Eisenhower did indeed meet with these extraterrestrial off-world astronauts. I hope my personal testimony will aid the nation in its quest for continued enlightenment. I am honored to follow in the footsteps of those who have come forward with their personal testimonies, those who deserve the admiration of the American people for sharing their accounts publicly in an effort to elevate our knowledge to a higher understanding of our existence. People such as former astronaut John Glenn, Edgar Mitchell, Gordon Cooper, and Buzz Aldrin, just to name a few. Former presidents Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter, Captain Bill Newhouse of the United States Marine Corps, Lieutenant Colonel John Williams of the United States Air Force, Colonel Philip Corso, Sr. of the United States Army, Commander Graham Bethune of the United States Navy, along with David Hamilton of the Department of Energy, Donna Hare of NASA, and James Coop of the National Security Agency. I would also like to thank the countries of France, Brazil, Britain, Russia, Italy, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, New Zealand, and our neighbor to the north, Canada, Uruguay, and Australia, for also opening their files to the citizens of their countries and allowing them access to information that is so very important to the evolution of humanity. I thank you for allowing me this opportunity to have a small part in doing the same by sharing the information I have given you today. Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank our communications crew for helping us make this happen today. And I'd also like to authorize distribution of this video for anyone who wants to use it for educational purposes.
Okay, so we've had some very credible witnesses come forward and actually verify the event occurring on February 10th, 1955, and several firsthand accounts of seeing the actual disc on the tarmac and the one above the Air Force One Constellation jet or plane. We also have direct knowledge now of high brass being spoken to in an Air Force base hangar after the event occurred between Dwight D. Eisenhower and other members of the military. But from what I understand, only people with above top secret clearance were allowed into the classified briefing. Nobody with less than a crypto clearance could get in. The one airman that was stopped at the base because he couldn't fly his plane out because Dwight D. Eisenhower was there, he was able to go into the mess hall and hear the end of the speech done by Eisenhower after all the classified information had already been disclosed. So he had secret clearance and he was able to get in. Other than that, this is probably the best information I could find out there in regards to the 1955 Holloman Air Force Base alien interaction between a sitting president of the United States and an alien group. Now, from what I understand, the alien group was the tall whites, not the grays. The grays were in 1954. The tall whites were in 1955. The reason I say this is Edward Snowden came out a few years ago and said that the tall whites, who were directly responsible for the rise of Nazi Germany during World War II, decided to make a pact with the United States because Germany failed in World War II. They wanted more control of our system of government, allegedly. So in regards to the tall whites, they have been instrumental in shaping what's going on behind the scenes for some time, according to these witnesses. What do you got to say, Tommy?
Well, I think Holloman absolutely happened. There are just too many people out there that were aware of the fact that it did happen. Eyewitnesses and people that had, let's just say, very close indirect knowledge of the event actually taking place. It's everywhere. And this story's been around, obviously, for a long time in ufology. I personally believe it. I believe that too many people have the pieces of this puzzle for it not to be a complete puzzle, let's say, a complete picture. Right. You know, that being said, one of the rumors is that the aliens had promised all kinds of technology, that kind of thing, if we gave up the nukes, and Eisenhower balked on that because during the, we're basically right at the beginning of the Cold War and all that, we weren't about to give up our ace card, ace in the hole. But it's a very interesting story. I personally believe it. Thomas, what do you think?
It's highly credible. I mean, we're listening to some old guys at the end of their career, well past their ability to be able to go ahead and be prosecuted for what they're talking about. They're basically knocking on death's door, and they're making some really great, you know, accountings of what took place. Now, Tim, wasn't there a lot of technology that came out where we jumped ahead like 150 years right after this meeting happened?
Right after the meeting happened, like 60 to 90 days afterwards, there was a comment made by an engineer to one of these gentlemen that were in the first video clip that I showed, that we made a jump from about 120 to 150 years ahead. And considering back in the 50s, we were still dealing with vacuum tube TV sets. We went from a vacuum tube ideology to engineering integrated circuitry, which we had no idea of to begin with. It was found originally in the Roswell crash, and it was also handed to us by the tall whites. Now, they gave us a computer to back engineer. The computer at that time was so far advanced that it was something that wasn't comprehended in our technology. So they had to work on it for many, many years, and they were able to do that. Now, the other type of technology that was given to us by not necessarily just the tall whites, but other groups as well, other alien groups as well, was the monofilament fiber that you find in like cable TV lines, fiber optics, lasers, original laser technology, not the lasers we have now, because those are back engineered. Night vision, that's another one.
And this is back in 1950, right?
This is back in 1950, maybe even earlier. But we're talking the tall whites gave us some type of technology that made us leapfrog ahead at least 150 years. Yeah. And that was in 55. So imagine where we are now with all the back engineering.
Sure. The printed circuit was first, and then it went from there. I mean, look at all the things that the printed circuits gave us that vacuum tubes and other basic solid state technology couldn't do. I mean, where would we be today?
They actually say the cell phone is in direct relation to technology that was back engineered from a UFO.
Nice.
So if you think about that and how they are able to integrate circuitry so small, imagine where it came from. And that would really blow your mind. Okay, we have a video clip. Something I want to say is a lot of UFO encounters happen to people that have no knowledge whatsoever of what UFOs are, of what aliens are, because their life does not exist around that fact. I mean, they don't have access to technology. They don't have access to TV sets like we do in the US. They don't have access to information systems that provide the information necessary to understand or even identify what's going on. I have a clip of a gentleman who is a Brazilian farmer on the in the Andes Mountains, who was who had an incredible encounter, and I would like to play that. It's not very long, so let's take a look at that. And this Brazilian farmer has had a physical encounter with a female ET. It's kind of racy and receives radiation sickness from it. So let's take a look at this, and we'll go from there.
That sounds like bad VD.
Yeah, you never know. Let's see. All righty, here we go.
Gordon Crichton is one of the most important people in this field who studied this thing for years. He's an ex-diplomat. He's a man who speaks 10 or 11 languages. Now, Mr. Crichton, I've been studying this thing now for some weeks, and I find it a completely bewildering mystery. There are reports of lights in the sky. There are reports of figures appearing on streets. People are seeing little shapes in craft. Is this something solid? Is this something real? Is it worldwide? What's going on?
Unquestionably, something very extraordinary is going on. Unquestionably, it's a very bewildering mystery. And we're glad to see that more and more very intelligent people are bringing their minds to bear on these questions. It's quite clear to me that since the end of the last war, and in particular since the first release of nuclear energy here, which I'm sure is connected with it, there have been a tremendous number of very extraordinary things happening. And this is happening all over the world. We are getting reports from every corner of the globe of people who are seeing things like this. That's a United States Air Force sketch of the type of creature which terrorized a household of people in Kentucky one night. They shot at them with shotguns, and they said that when the pellets hit them, it sounded as though they were firing into a bucket.
This is a little figure about 3 feet high.
Little creature about 3 feet high with large ears.
Which presumably comes from where?
That's the question.
What do you think?
I've no idea, and I'm sure nobody has. Now, in the early years, and I say that, when I say the early years, for me, that means nearly 30 years ago, because I saw one of these things in China in 1941, when I was in the embassy there. I naturally didn't say there goes a flying saucer, because the term hadn't been coined then. But I did think I'd seen something very extraordinary. And I never forgot what I'd seen. And some years later, I was in America, and I began to see the reports in the press, heavily censored reports, some of them, of things, yes, because they're military reports, of things that were seen over the Western Front. And my files began then, and this house is bulging now with files. We have a lot of evidence of people being maltreated. We have a lot of evidence of cases of people who've been killed, who've been burnt badly by radiation, by unknown forms of rays. People have been carried off and have certainly not come back again. None of this looks to me like the behavior of benevolent beings. And therefore, it's not surprising that you've mentioned the attitude of governments. It's not surprising the governments aren't saying anything about it. And I don't want to go on record as being critical of the governments for their view. I think it's a very serious matter. I think it is not one that one can bring to the attention of everybody.
In other words, you're telling me there's a deliberate plan to keep this away from people.
I'm sure, and I think very wisely. Because if many people knew what I know about it, from my study of it over many years, they might be very alarmed. We have many cases on record of cattle being taken. We have many cases on record where they've been seen taking rocks, stones, vegetation, plants, exactly the things that we would do and have done on the moon already, and would do on any other planet we landed on when exploring. These do look like extraterrestrial explorers.
And with intent, with people intentionally fishing around, nosing around, with a purpose.
We also have many alarming cases, alarming because we don't know the implications of them, of blood being taken from people, and also semen, and also ova from women. There's at least one good case of sexual intercourse, and I would think several, which would stand up to scrutiny.
One was a farmer in the hinterland of Minas Gerais state, several hundred kilometers inland from Rio de Janeiro. He was working the equipment on his farm. They had one tractor, and his family used this in rotation. They kept this capital equipment working throughout the day, 24 hours. One would be working, the other one sleeping. His turn was at night. And he was ploughing his field with his lights on at night. Now, he'd seen one of these objects come down on the 14th of October, 1957. And he was puzzled by this thing, and he went to see what it was, and every time he went after it, this thing went off to a different part of the field, and then it disappeared. The next night, October the 15th, he went out alone and was ploughing when this thing came down again, and this time it came right close up to his tractor. He decided to jump out of the cab and run for it, but says that he was overtaken while he was running by 4 smaller figures than he, and he's not a big man, who dragged him struggling into the craft, up a gangway into the craft. Now, this is his story, remember. He says that he was stripped while he was in there and given a medical. They took samples of blood from him and washed him over with some unguent, and then took him into a separate cabin where gas was pumped into the cabin, and he was violently sick. And then after this, he was sitting there and began to feel better. He had been terribly alarmed, of course, and he was now feeling better. And then, strangely, a door, he said, opened. He couldn't see how it could have opened because he didn't know there was a door there. And a person came through, and it was a female. And this one was completely naked, according to his testimony. And, well, eventually he had felt so relaxed that the inevitable took place at her urging, apparently. And then he was, apparently, yes, according to his testimony. And then he was shown around, given his clothes back again, he was shown around the craft and was put down again, and he went back home. This tremendous story, and he locked in his mind. He was puzzled and worried and frightened by it. He began to come out in spots, and later, at his own expense, he knew that there had been some stories of this sort of thing floating around in Brazilian magazines, a CRUZ magazine like this. And he found his way to the offices of O Cruzeiro and saw one of the editorial staff, João Martins, who took him to see Dr. Lavo Fontes, medical doctor. And they took a disposition from this man, a testimony, and gave him a medical examination. And he was discovered to have a mild degree of radiation sickness. Now, how a man had picked up radiation sickness in the heart of the Brazilian hinterland, ploughing a field, goodness alone knows, living a simple agrarian life, very simple agrarian life, goodness alone knows.
Now, you have to bear in mind that these people who have these experiences are not readers of Flying Saucer Review. They're not members of Flying Saucer spotting clubs. They're ordinary people. And they're very often, if it's South America, there may be illiterate peasants on the slopes of the Andes. And yet, all over the world, people are having experiences which fall into a recognizable slot.
Oh. You're muted, Tim.
You're muted, Tim.
In regards to that, I can say that I've heard of claims of people actually having physical congress with an alien life form. Mm-hmm. But they're rare. So I had to bring that out. It's interesting that that happened to someone that had absolutely no knowledge or understanding of what these things were. What do you think, Tommy?
Well, this story's been around forever, and you're right. This guy was, let's say, somewhat primitive compared to everyone else. I mean, he didn't have the benefits of television, radio, things of that nature that everybody else enjoyed. So it's, how does a guy from a region like that, basically a peasant farmer, come up with radiation poisoning? I mean, how does that even work? So, and it was documented, bona fide, radiation poisoning, no doubt about that. There's a medical record of this. So, did he get with an alien woman? I mean, you can't dispute that. You can't dispute it because of the radiation factor. I mean, unless he found some radio activity out on his farm somewhere, it's pretty credible.
According to what I understand, before we go to Thomas, according to what I understand, the background radiation was measured and on his farm after they found him with the radiation poisoning to determine what the difference was, to verify that there was a verifiable difference between the background radiation and his poisoning level. So there was something other than what was on his farm to cause that. And the fact is that it was actually severe enough to cause him to break out in spots.
Yeah.
And the only other time that I remember in ufology where someone actually broke out with radiation spots was the Cash Landrum case, where the diamond-shaped UFO was spewing radiation down on them as it was starting to land.
The 2 women and the kid.
2 women and the kid. And those 2 women eventually died from that case. So what I'm going to say is, yes, it happens, and it happens to people that do not have any clue about UFOs, aliens, alien life, nothing. They are focusing on their farming. And I live in a rural area in Minnesota, and I have to tell you, I've talked to a lot of farmers, and you know, they're thinking about their corn, their crops and stuff, their cattle. They're not thinking about what we're talking about. So when I bring it up to them and they tell me, oh yeah, I saw a disc above the barn, or I saw something with multiple lights on it above my field, and they don't know what it is. They just know it's fact that it happened. So keep your eyes open, keep your eyes to the sky. You never know what you're going to find. Thomas, what do you think?
Well, I mean, this is the second week in a row we've heard about, you know, experiences from farmers, from people who are just living a simple life, you know, working the land and everything. Both times they ended with radiation, except this one got to experience a freaking long distance booty call. So,
yep, a long distance booty call. Yep.
Yeah. So, you know, it's credible. It just goes to show there's a lot of stuff that goes on out there that's just, you know, different.
Yeah, different. Exactly. Anyone have any last comments on the panel?
Well, it's been a great show. Again, the Eisenhower meeting, I personally believe that took place. I mean, again, there's just too many people out there that witnessed that, or at least enough parts of it to be able to draw a picture there. I mean, they're talking about the commander-in-chief, things of that nature. Pretty interesting. As far as the last story is concerned with the farmer, you know, that's been, like I say, it's been around forever. You know, how does a person in his particular part of the world and his particular occupation come in contact with enough radiation to actually cause them to have some sort of physical reaction or damage from it? I mean, how does that even work? So again, I'm gonna chalk that one up as a definite maybe.
Yep, same here. What about you, Thomas?
Yeah, I'll throw it up there and I'll give it a yes.
Okay.
I mean, there's no reason this guy's going to go ahead and make this kind of stuff up. I mean, you just got to think about it. It's too out there. And plus there's enough evidence of, like you said, Tommy, in the middle of freaking Brazil, in the middle of nowhere, radiation sickness.
Yeah. How would that happen if the background radiation is less than what he's exhibiting with his poisoning?
Bingo.
Yeah. Right. And the fact that he breaks out in spots, it has to be significant enough to change and alter the cell structure to cause the spots.
Yep.
So, yeah, I would say that the Holloman Air Force Base segment was filled with at least 3 very credible witnesses, and I have to chalk that up to probably a valid account. And in regards, okay, go ahead, Tommy.
Well, I did want to add one other point, something he said that kind of caught me and I thought was very interesting. Like he said, we've got our best, brightest, and finest people that are actually talking about this phenomenon. We're talking about our astronauts like Gordon Cooper. These guys have seen every kind of aerial phenomenon there is, and they've been in space. Edward Mitchell, everybody else that this part of our space program, there are so many of them that have actually come out and referenced, you know, aliens, extraterrestrials, technology, things like that. And to Thomas's point, these people are our best, brightest. You know, there's no reason for them to come out in the wee hours of their career, the twilight of their career, and take the chance on, you know, for the ridicule, things of that nature. Why would they want to do that unless it was true?
It's underconscious. It's something that's there. It's part of them that they've kept quiet for all this long, and they're saying, "This is my opportunity to let people know what I know because I don't want it to follow me into the grave."
Right. So I think a lot of people are starting to come forward because they are in their twilight years, and they want to get their story out. And that's what we at UFO Man are trying to do. We're trying to get that information out to the public so that you are informed to the history behind the ufology subject, because the history is what makes up the bulk of the true disclosure.
Yeah, but you know, Tim, we really like your videos too.
And for the record,
that's cool.
And for the record, we provide you with the whole picture and allow you, the audience, to make up your own mind. That's how we roll here.
Yeah.
Right. We want you to make up your own assessments. Anytime I do a video on a UFO or something, I always ask you to make your own assessment, because I'm not there to make an assessment for you. You are going to watch the clip and make an assessment for yourself, and then we can talk about it in the chat. And if you go over to Tommy Highway TV, he's the same way. He will do the same thing on his channel. Allow you to make up your own mind. I mean, he will voice his opinion and you can go from there. And I think if you haven't subbed, go over to Tommy's channel and give him a sub. We want to get him above 200 if possible. That'd be great. In regards to my channel, if you want to sub, that'd be great as well. Thank you to everyone in the chat for coming out tonight. We had a really good show. Next week, we will show some UFO videos so that we have a little more content. But tonight, we're going to roll credits.